The morning in D.C. started like any other. Gray skies, light humidity in the air, and just another committee hearing scheduled on Capitol Hill. The room buzzed with quiet prep. Mics were checked, water glasses filled halfway, staffers whispering notes to one another. On the surface, it was just another day, but anyone paying attention could sense it. Something was about to shift. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat calmly at her desk, flipping through her notes. She had flown in from Dallas the night before, barely slept, and skipped the staff breakfast. But she wasn't tired. She was focused. Her gold hoop earrings caught the light, and her tailored navy blazer carried quiet authority. She looked like someone who knew what she was about to say would matter. At the back of the room sat Karoline Leavitt. You could spot her instantly. Polished, poised, and already halfway camera ready. Known more for her viral cable news appearances than policy expertise, Karoline was the kind of political commentator who knew how to stir a pot and look good doing it. This wasn't her first controversial moment, but it was about to become her most unforgettable. The hearing topic sounded neutral enough, addressing inequities in the American education system. But everyone knew this wasn't really about education. It was about power, about narrative, about whose version of America would take center stage. Routine statements opened the session. A few representatives rattled off statistics, a few offered bipartisan platitudes. Then the chairwoman spoke into the mic. We'll now yield time to Ms. Karoline Leavitt, guest commentator. Karoline stood, smooth and confident. Thank you, Madam Chair, she began. Her voice was pleasant, her tone polite, but her words had barbed edges. I'm here today because Americans are exhausted by victimhood narratives, tired of hearing about systemic this, historic that. Some people would rather blame the past than own the present. A few heads turned. Jasmine didn't. She kept her eyes on her notes, listening, waiting. But let's be honest, Karoline continued, eyes sweeping the room. If some of these so-called leaders hate America this much, maybe they'd be happier in Africa. Time stopped. You could feel it, not just in the silence, but in the stillness. Ade's pen froze mid-note. The air conditioner hum suddenly felt deafening. Jasmine looked up. No fury, no flinch. Just presence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She didn't even blink. Because silence, real silence, has weight, and in that moment, it was heavier than any insult thrown across a congressional room. She reached for her water, took a sip, and waited. The response wasn't ready yet, but it was coming, and when it landed, it would rewrite the entire room. The silence didn't break. It deepened. Karoline Leavitt had taken her seat again, unaware that the room wasn't responding because they agreed, but because they were waiting. Waiting to see what Jasmine would do, what she would say, how she would hold the weight of an insult meant to sting in front of the nation. Jasmine didn't rush. She placed her water bottle down, fingers still lightly touching its rim. Then she leaned forward. Madam Chair, she said, voice low but clear, I ask that the last comment be struck from the record for violating the dignity of this hearing. No theatrics, no emotional outburst, just command, wrapped in calm. The chairwoman blinked, caught off guard. It will be reviewed, she said quickly, a little too softly. But Jasmine wasn't speaking for the chair. She was speaking for everyone in the room. And far beyond it. She looked at Karoline, not with rage, but with something colder, more exacting. Pity? Number. It was recognition. Recognition of the game being played, and who always paid the price for it. When people talk about patriotism, Jasmine began, they often forget that questioning America doesn't mean hating it. In fact, the people who fight the hardest for justice are the ones who love this country enough to demand better from it. Karoline shifted slightly in her seat. Jasmine's voice stayed even. My ancestors didn't come here by choice, but I am here by conviction. And no one, not a microphone opportunist, not a viral soundbite artist, gets to tell me where I belong. a breath, a pause, and then, I was born here. I pay taxes here. I serve here. I represent Americans who built this country with their backs, then got told to get out of it. The room was no longer quiet out of shock. Now it was out of reverence. Jasmine pulled out a folded piece of paper from her folder, a handwritten note from a constituent named Denise. She unfolded it carefully, as if the act itself mattered. She wrote to me last week, Jasmine said. Said her son came home from school crying after another student told him to go back to Africa. He's 9. The words landed hard. The tension in the room twisted, turned, and settled into something uncomfortable. Where exactly, Jasmine continued, do you suggest he go? Nobody answered. Nobody could. Karoline stared ahead, lips pursed, but the smugness had slipped, even if only slightly. Because now the conversation wasn't about politics, it was about something raw, something real. And Jasmine was just getting started. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, but the words she spoke filled every inch of that hearing room. She held Denise's letter in her hands like a testimony. Not for show, not for drama, but because paper carries weight when it holds pain. She said her son asked if he was American enough, Jasmine continued, because of the color of his skin, because of where his ancestors came from. The committee members were silent, not from discomfort, but from confrontation, because this wasn't about one rude comment anymore. This was about the soil of America, and who had been forced to water it with generations of labor, only to be asked to leave the garden. Jasmine leaned back slightly. We can talk about education policy all day, she said, tone sharpening. But if children are being told they don't belong here, then the curriculum is not the problem. The culture is. Karoline crossed her arms, trying to appear unfazed, but even she knew. She had opened a door, and now Jasmine had walked through it, holding centuries of unspoken truth in her hands. You don't get to weaponize identity, Jasmine said, eyes locked on her. Not when you're a product of privilege so thick, you don't even recognize it's there. She paused, letting the words sink in. My mother raised me and my brother while working 2 jobs. Not once did she ask this country for a handout. She asked for dignity. And when you stand in front of a mic and say, maybe I'd be better off in another continent, what you're really saying is, know your place. The silence turned sharper. And to that I say, this is my place. She pointed downward, not dramatically, just deliberately, toward the congressional seal on the table in front of her. This seat, this microphone, this room, I earned it, I fought for it, and I don't need permission to be here. Somewhere in the back, a reporter slowly lowered her phone, no longer recording out of obligation, but out of awe. Jasmine turned slightly to the broader panel. And let's be honest, this isn't just about me, she said. It's about every kid who ever got told to go back somewhere they've never even been. It's about every worker who's treated like a visitor in their own country. It's about every parent who teaches their child to love a country that hasn't always loved them back. A low murmur of acknowledgement stirred from a few aides near the side of the room. A senator to her left shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to nod or hide. Karoline sat still, but her face betrayed a flicker of doubt. Just a flash. Jasmine folded the letter gently, slid it back into her folder, and said nothing more. She didn't need to, because history doesn't whisper. It echoes, loudest when the right person is willing to say what others are afraid to admit. The air in the chamber had changed. It wasn't just heavy now, it was charged. Every word Jasmine had spoken still hung in the space between the ceiling lights and the silence, like dust caught in sunlight. And everyone, from the chairwoman to the interns manning the back table, knew they weren't watching a typical exchange. They were witnessing a reckoning. Karoline sat stiffly. She reached for her notes, as if paper could shield her from what was coming next. But Jasmine hadn't come to debate. She had come to expose. I grew up knowing I'd have to be twice as good to be considered half as legitimate, Jasmine said, her voice almost calm now, and I was okay with that. Because I thought if I could just prove I was smart enough, respectful enough, articulate enough, I'd earn my place. She looked directly at Karoline. But people like you don't move the goalposts. You flip the whole field. Someone in the gallery coughed. A small, nervous sound, the kind people make when they realize they're watching someone say the part that's not supposed to be said out loud. Jasmine continued, her cadence slower now, deliberate. You come here with your Fox News-ready sound bites and pretend patriotism, and you toss insults disguised as policy critiques. You think if you smile while you say it, it's not racist. But racism with a smile is still racism. Karoline shifted, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. But Jasmine wasn't cruel. She wasn't here to humiliate. She was here to reveal. See, what scares people like you, Jasmine added, is not our rage, it's our calm. It's when we answer hate with fact. It's when we sit still and let you drown in your own assumptions. She paused, scanning the room. I didn't come here for applause, she said. I came here for accountability. Then she pulled a small photo from her binder. It was grainy, worn, clearly kept for years. A black woman, late 30s, standing in front of a rundown school building in Texas, her eyes tired but proud. My 5th grade teacher, Miss Harris, Jasmine said. She taught me the Pledge of Allegiance. She also taught me how to file eviction paperwork when her family lost their home during the recession. She believed in this country, even when it didn't believe in her. She placed the photo gently on the table. Let it sit there. That's patriotism, Jasmine said softly. Not the kind you wear on a lapel, the kind you live through bruises, bills, and broken promises. The hearing room was silent, not frozen, but listening, feeling. Karoline's earlier smirk was gone now. She looked at Jasmine, really looked, for the first time, and what she saw wasn't a political opponent. It was a mirror, one that didn't flatter, one that didn't lie, one that forced you to see what you'd rather pretend isn't there. Jasmine didn't rush to speak again. Instead, she let the quiet expand, not as a void, but as a verdict. Karoline Leavitt had said what she said for attention. She'd expected outrage, maybe even anger. What she got instead was precision, and that was far more dangerous. Because when someone wields truth like a scalpel, it doesn't cause noise, it causes stillness. Jasmine slowly closed her binder, not to end the conversation, but to mark its turning point. Her voice returned, even and deliberate. You know what I've learned? She said, eyes fixed on no one and everyone at once. You don't need to scream when you're right. The room breathed shallowly. She looked down for a moment, then back up. There's a story I don't often tell, not because I'm ashamed of it, but because when Black women show pain, people either dismiss it or dissect it. Now her voice dipped, softer, closer. I was 14 when my uncle was pulled over for a broken taillight. He was handcuffed in front of me and my cousins. No warrant, no explanation. Just slammed on the hood of a car because, quote, he looked nervous. She didn't blink. That was the first time I realized fear could wear a badge, and that dignity didn't come standard with citizenship. A low sigh came from somewhere in the gallery, not dramatic, just human. Jasmine glanced at Karoline, then gently leaned in. So, when you say I should go back somewhere, she continued, what you're really doing is trying to erase the parts of America you're uncomfortable acknowledging. Her voice grew steadier, rising by degrees, not in volume, but in truth. Because if people like me belong here, then people like you have to answer for what's been done to us. That landed. Karoline opened her mouth, but closed it again. Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply existed, powerfully, unapologetically. Here's the thing, Jasmine added, tapping the table once for emphasis. I don't need to out-yell anyone. I outlast them, and I outwork them. She paused, then one final sentence. Because silence, when rooted in truth, is louder than any insult ever thrown. The sentence didn't shout. It didn't climb. It just landed, like a verdict in a room that had already made up its mind. No applause, no dramatic music, just acknowledgement, because sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to raise the standard. By the time the hearing reached its third hour, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to reverent. The earlier snide chuckles were gone. The performative note-taking had stopped. People weren't preparing responses anymore. They were trying to catch up. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered a question, she had reframed the entire premise. Chairwoman Dana Willis adjusted her glasses, glanced at Jasmine, and then at Karoline. The floor was technically open again, but nobody wanted to go next. Not after what had just happened. Karoline finally leaned into her mic. Her voice was clipped, overly steady, the tone of someone trying not to crack. "I believe in free speech," she said. "But I also believe in accountability, and it's not racist to question how taxpayer dollars are being used." Jasmine turned, slowly. "Questioning is accountability," she replied calmly. "But context is everything. You didn't ask about policy. You didn't ask about oversight. You told me to go back, and that wasn't about governance. That was about erasure." The word erasure hit like a dropped gavel. Karoline bristled. "I didn't say—" "You implied," Jasmine cut in gently, "and implication is how bias survives in polite company." Boom. That sentence would be tweeted out before the hearing even ended. It would end up as a quote on protest posters, on t-shirts, in high school civics classrooms. Bias survives in polite company. Jasmine didn't linger on the moment. She pivoted to something deeper, something harder. "My father used to say, what America refuses to admit, it forces others to carry," she said. And he was right. Black families carry generational trauma as if it were luggage. We carry redlined neighborhoods, underfunded schools, broken bridges, and when we demand change, we're told we're ungrateful. She held up a report, housing statistics broken down by ZIP code. "In districts like mine, Black women are evicted at rates higher than any other group, not because they're lazy, not because they're irresponsible, but because the system was never designed for them to survive in the first place." Even the stenographer paused to glance up. Jasmine's words didn't build like a speech. They unfolded like a memory. "You can call it whatever makes you feel more comfortable," she added. "Fiscal concern, cultural critique. But if the subtext of your policy is that some people are more American than others, then it's not policy. It's prejudice with paperwork." Another silence. But this one wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was respectful. Even the interns in the back row were now sitting upright, not out of duty, but out of awe. Karoline's face was tight, not angry, just exposed, because Jasmine had taken the high road and paved it with facts, with pain, with poise. And in doing so, she'd done something extraordinary. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd held up a mirror to the whole damn room. No one moved, not the aides checking their phones, not the press corps scribbling on their pads. The hearing room wasn't just quiet. It was suspended, as if time itself had paused to listen to what Jasmine would say next. She wasn't speaking louder. She was speaking deeper. "I get that some people don't like when I bring up race," Jasmine said. "But let's not kid ourselves. America was built on categorizing people, then pretending those categories don't matter anymore." She turned to Karoline, but her eyes held something different now. Not fire, not fury. Clarity. "You said what you said because you thought it wouldn't follow you," she continued. "That if you wrapped it in a question and delivered it with a smile, it wouldn't land as an attack. But it did. And it's not just me that felt it." Jasmine opened her folder again, slower this time, not to present evidence, but to pull something personal. A letter, handwritten, creased at the corners. "My grandmother wrote this to me when I got elected. I keep it with me, not as inspiration, but as reminder." She read, voice steady but soft. "Baby, they'll act like they don't see you, but they'll sure feel it when you speak. Don't let their comfort become your silence." A murmur of emotion moved through the gallery. Karoline looked away. Jasmine folded the letter back into its envelope with reverence. "I didn't come here to fight," she said. "I came here to protect the truth, even if it makes people uncomfortable." Her voice hardened slightly, not out of anger, but resolve. Because the truth is, people like my grandmother couldn't sit at counters, my mother couldn't apply for loans, and now you want to tell me I should be grateful just to speak, like that microphone was a gift instead of a right. Silence again. Then, I don't speak because I'm angry. I speak because I remember. That line hit hard. A congressional staffer in the second row wiped her cheek. A young man in a crisp navy suit clenched his jaw. Everyone had shifted, not politically, but emotionally. Because they weren't watching a politician anymore, they were witnessing someone tell a generational truth. Jasmine leaned back slightly, her voice fell to a whisper. The thing that scares people most isn't the sound of change. It's the fact that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And with that, she let the silence stretch one last time. No grand finale, no applause line, just presence, just weight, and a truth that didn't beg to be heard. It demanded it. After Jasmine's final words, the hearing room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Instead, it settled, like dust after a storm, like truth when it finally lands where it belongs. The chairwoman cleared her throat but didn't speak. The gavel didn't fall. There was no official closure. Because everyone knew what had just happened, didn't need ceremony. It needed reflection. Karoline Leavitt sat back in her chair, her notes untouched. For once, she had no comeback, no polished retort. Just silence, the same kind she had tried to twist into power earlier. But now, that silence belonged to Jasmine. Not as a void, but as victory. Cameras were still rolling, clips were already hitting Twitter. The phrase polite bias was trending alongside Crockett 2028. Commentators on both sides of the aisle were scrambling for takes. But Jasmine, she was calm. She didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She just breathed, deeply, deliberately. Later that night, back in her office, she would sit with her team, her phone buzzing nonstop. Reporters would request interviews. A senator's aide would text, "You changed something today." But for now, she just gathered her things. One of the interns, a girl with big glasses and a notebook full of Jasmine quotes, whispered, "That was something else." Jasmine gave a small nod. "It wasn't for them," she said. "It was for everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet and take it." The intern looked stunned, inspired, changed. Outside the hearing, the air felt different, not cleaner, just clearer. Because when a black woman walks into a room built to silence her, and walks out having shifted the entire narrative, people don't forget that. They don't forget how calm can cut sharper than chaos. They don't forget how dignity can sound louder than outrage. They don't forget Jasmine Crockett. And as she stepped into the hallway, heels clicking, binder under her arm, head high, she didn't look like someone who had won a debate. She looked like someone who had outgrown it. Because in the end, she didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. And she spoke truth to power, not with noise, but with presence. And the whole country heard it. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room isn't a shout, it's the silence that follows truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't come to perform. She came to remind the world that dignity doesn't mean silence, and that strength doesn't always wear a suit and tie. When Karoline Leavitt crossed a line, Jasmine didn't respond with rage. She responded with memory, with clarity, with a voice that had carried generations behind it, and a future still being built ahead. This wasn't just about a hearing. This was about every person who's ever been told to go back, every kid who's ever felt invisible, every mother who's worked double shifts only to be blamed for the system that failed her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. And when she spoke, she didn't just reclaim the room. She made it hers. Because this fight isn't about looking strong. It's about being heard. And today, America heard. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Let your voice carry someone else's silence. Because stories like this aren't just meant to be watched. They're meant to start something. This is curiosity stories. And this is why we keep telling them.